Welcome to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. Arif, do you know what the value of your house is right now?
I have an idea.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of movement and a lot of speculation, right?
For sure.
So you know, when you ask me that question, the first thing that I go to in my brain is what is the value of a home, fair market value, and it's what is someone willing to pay.
Well, you're a little more intricate and detailed than most, but I think for most people, the point being, everybody wants to know what the value of their house is at any given time. Certainly as a realtor, it's one of, if not the most asked question that we'll get. You're at a cocktail party, wherever you are, someone finds out you're a realtor, the first thing they ask you about isn't how are your kids doing, it's what's my house worth?
Exactly, and in fairness, the response that I typically get is something along the lines of, well, I knew what my house was worth at the height of the market.
Yeah.
Because
we were paying close attention when it was going up. But even so, they're just as much, they want to know how much capital, how much appreciation and equity they may be losing as the market is quieting over the last year.
Let me mess with you a little bit more, Mike, since we're on that.
Go for it.
On that vein right now. Well, the other thing that's really interesting for me that I've noticed is that because so many people are paying attention to national level news and they hear the headline story that says houses are down 30% or whatever that may be, and nobody stops, many people fail, they do themselves a disservice to not stop and look at, well, what is the actual reality in my localized market, because we've got different influences compared to other regions in the country.
That's right. Like, you know, for example, the average detached home price in Barrie that's given. That average will be different depending on the neighborhood. It's going to be depending on various elements of the home. It's not an absolute number. It's a range of price.
And
right
we've been
now,
fairly lucky, Mike, would you say? We've been fairly fortunate because of other influences that have sort of continued a little bit of an upward pressure?
I think when we're done here, that question's going to be far easier to answer here. So let's delve into it a bit. Like, the average price of a detached home in Barrie at the moment is around $775, about $750 to $775. There are different services out there who are providing statistics. I'm going by the Canadian Real Estate Association stats.
Good. Okay.
If you go to Zolo or Zoocasa or any of these other products out there, oftentimes they're a little more ambitious with what they offer. I don't know how they're doing their math. I know how we do our math, which is basically using the same formulas that a real estate appraiser will do and charge you $1,000 for. That is, if your realtor is doing it right and doing it properly and not just skimping over. About a 10 to 15% decline is what we have seen since that peak in January 2022. And we peaked at that time. We didn't dip, we jumped to a little bit over $1 million for a very brief period, but over this, like if we say over the month of January, if we average what the price was there, we were looking at about a $950,000 average price for a detached home in January of 2021.
I just want to camp out on one thing here. When you look at that graphic, that's up on the screen, thanks for putting it up. I don't think we can undersell or underemphasize the importance of what we're looking at on this graphic here.
And what we are seeing there is, and the question I was going to ask you is, like, how far back do you think you would have to go? You know, if your value today is the average price of an average home, $775, how far back before the peak of the market in January 2022 do you think you'd have to go to see when houses for the first time had hit a $775 average? Do you think it would be 2, 3, 4, 5 years back? And the reality is, according to those graphics, it's about 4 months prior to. So September of 2020. Get
spoiler alert put up on this.
So from September 2021 to January 2022, your home was above the average price today.
Mike,
for a very brief period, and then it's come back. Sure.
Give us a little perspective. That home that was an average priced home for 4 months.
Yeah.
Okay, just so we're clear, it touched for 4 months at around $1.05 million.
Yeah.
But was hovering around the $950 mark for a slightly longer period of time.
But that number was frozen in the minds of many who thought anything less than that afterwards is a loss.
Yeah. Well, I want to go there just for a second, though. Give me a little perspective, okay? Because in that same graph, it showed we had a similar peak of activity back in 2017. We've
2017 in the spring, we jumped for a month or two, and then we dropped right back down to where we were 2 or 3 months earlier.
So we're talking about in a 5-year period of time, the value of a home did what?
It
From 2017 to 2022?
Continued to increase. Month to month, the values were increasing. That period
nearly double though, right?
But almost doubled from 17, yeah. In fact, in some areas they did truly double or more. Now from that 4-month period, again from 2016, from 2021 September to January 2022, over 4 months, home values increased 18%. Now we're saying since that peak that values have dropped anywhere from 10 to 20%, again, depending on what neighborhood you're in and the details of your home.
I think you're trying to drive a point here, though.
The point being is, contrary to a lot of the media hype,
yeah.
And we've talked on that, it hasn't been an apocalypse now in the real estate market. We just went crazy for a while, and then we came to our senses again.
Well, listen, again, I know we've been so neutral on the media over the past few years, but in fairness, right, what sells in the headlines? Chaos and devastation and those types of things.
Yeah.
That's an amazing point, and I think it's worth noting. You know, we've said it before, and it's the same thing in the stock market, by the way. Snark market, yeah. As long as you're holding those stocks or those shares, you haven't lost until you cash out.
Well, that's the other thing, too.
You haven't won until you've cashed out.
It's irrelevant what any of that was if you've held all the way through. It's only if you liquidated. And if you liquidated at that peak, and you still needed a place to live and we're going to repurchase, you were buying at those inflated prices again. Yeah. So it was kind of a wash. Yeah. The only people who truly suffered through that, and by suffered I mean it's just going to take them a little bit more time to recover, is those who bought at that peak.
Sure.
They're going to have to wait it out until those prices return again.
Okay, but let's put that in perspective again. If you bought in 2017 and you actually intended to live there, it wasn't a flip. If this was a flip for you, then it's a business, and I'm sorry, I feel for you. I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. That was a business decision that you made. Yeah. And I trust that you made that with the help of a lawyer or the help of an accountant or a financial advisor, and you put all of the market statistics in your favor, and you made a bet and you lost. Okay, so that's like going to Vegas for a weekend. For obviously a high-priced loss in Vegas, but if you purchased as a business or as a flip in 2017 at the height and then it tanked, that's on you. If you purchased and you...
Or no, at 2021 at the height. Not 17.
Or 17.
17, we were still down quite a ways. We were coming up.
We had a blip. We had.
Oh, sorry. You're talking about that
I'm talking
blip
about that
in
peak in 17. Absolutely.
That spring.
So I'm saying the same thing here. If this was a business decision, then that was a decision that you made and you played your cards and you weren't a first mover and you didn't get in on the beginning of the market. You waited at the end and it didn't work out favorably. If you lived there in 2017 and raised your family in 2017 and perhaps had a fixed rate mortgage in 17, or you even were paying a variable rate or adjustable rate and it was still in the low, 1 and 2% range, you're doing fine, even if the market dropped out by 15 to 20 or 30%, but you still own that home, your life didn't change. And in fact, even though you paid at the height and then suddenly apparently the home values went down, by 2019, 20, and 2021,
you more than
corrected yourself. Absolutely.
And let's look at that
So I'm trying to put it in perspective
I hear
for today,
you.
Mike.
And just further to that, I mean, historically home values are still up if you bought more than 3 years ago. And I'm just going to read off the screen because need these numbers. If you bought an average price Barrie home in early 2014, you would have paid about $300,000 for it. As recently as 3 years ago in 2020, that same home was worth $550,000. Today, even after the market correction, which all indications are we have bottomed out, and that 2014 $300,000 home is worth around $750,000 in Barrie today.
For all the people who are saying, I've missed it, this will never happen again, it's not possible, how could house prices possibly go up? Well, I will take you back to 2001, where I bought a home for $142,500, and that was a bidding war. And somebody's probably yelling at me saying, who cares, that's irrelevant, it doesn't matter today. But at that same time, new builds were going for $250,000 to $300,000, and this is for a condo. And this was for a luxury condo. You know, the one where Blake and Dunlop basically meet there.
Yeah.
$350,000.
Seemed ridiculous
and
to pay.
I said
even for a
to my
detached
wife,
home, that was extravagance.
I said, there is no way we can do that. Who could justify that price? It's a condo, for crying out loud. There's no blade of grass there. There's no drive, whatever.
It's a castle.
And I said, it'll never happen. So here we are talking about the same houses that are worth on an average of 950, or right now I think you're saying 775, but they peaked out at around 9-10 million.
And 10 years ago, the mindset was that prices then were overinflated. But I think you can look at any 10-year period over the last 100 years, and people were saying house prices are as high as they're ever going to go. They're overinflated. That's always just been the default position on anybody. And we look today and we just cannot imagine how prices could ever go any higher than they are. Well, let's all meet back here in 10 years from now and go, remember when you could buy a detached house, the average price house was $750,000, and people will go, boy, I wish I got in then.
Absolutely, and I did make a promise to you. We're not gonna dedicate the show to housing affordability or anything like that. We've covered that very well, I think, over the last few years.
We have, yeah.
And I think we've done certainly our fair share, if not more,
our public service
than many
has certainly been completed on that.
Absolutely. But for those who back 10 years ago or even more, maybe even 5 years ago only have said, you know, how could we ever afford? Well, I'm not going to get into that debate. That's for everybody in their own scenario.
It's more of a challenge
to decide.
But it's still doable.
What is my reality and what are my options in my reality? So are you alone trying to figure it out? Are you upgrading certain skill sets to command more income? Are you partnering with somebody else, whether it's a spouse, a family member, whatever it may be? But and that's a topic for a different conversation, so I don't even want to go into that. What I will say is, somehow magically, since I bought that house in 2001, or since 2015, or even again today, the world still did manage to go on. People did still figure out how
wages go up, economies get better. You know, the stock market continues to get better. You know, the domestic trades, goods and services, everything continues.
Somehow we're
Commerce
not paying
in general
a
continues
quarter
to
for a quart of milk. We're actually paying into the $3 and $4.
And why does it continue to go up? At the root of it all is the fact the population of the planet continues to increase. So there's more people using all of those goods and services, which just means there's more opportunity to generate revenue from that.
So what are we going to talk about on the other side of the break, Mike?
Well, on the other side of the break, I mean, there is the mindset, and you're hearing it in the media more and more too. I've read a number of different articles from people saying, well, now is the time, given everything, the high price of homes, high cost of mortgages, the challenges of getting into a home, renting is a better opportunity than ownership.
Interesting.
And I thought about it, are we really there where being a renter is probably a safer and economically more sound alternative to home ownership? So I did some number crunching. I did a little bit of research.
Let's find out.
Let's look at that.
Let's find out what you came up with during your little investigative, what do you want to call it?
I would call it spending too much time on the computer after 11 p.m. when I should have been sleeping.
There you go. We'll be right back after this break on Rogers TV. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV. And Mike, before the break, we've been crunching some numbers and looking at things to put them in perspective. What's your home worth today? Careful for the headlines. What's it really worth? Before you have a sleepless night, if you actually take a look at the numbers historically and literally where you are today, you know, you're still in a really good position from an equity and a value perspective.
If you've done your preparation, then, and those who are prepared are the ones who will always, you know, continue on through.
Exactly. But here's some other things that come in, and those are those influencers, right? We talk about the media, and we talk about other perspectives, and we talk about, of course, localized versus regionalized or national numbers, which really there is no such thing as a national number. We've determined that over the years. But you've got pundits, you've got people who are speculating on what's coming next.
Op-ed piece, and
Exactly.
And my guess on this topic not, because many of them are probably living in downtown Toronto renting an apartment. So they're just trying to justify their lot in life, I think. I'm going to write an article that supports why I live in this apartment versus owning a home in the suburbs.
Clearly, Mike, something triggered you. All right, you were triggered.
I've seen it too many times, yeah.
And somebody said something that kind of got you thinking, and I know it nagged on you, it grated on you, and it was curious, and you wanted to...
Not just that, just made me curious. Like,
okay.
Is there fact behind this? And I thought, well, let's get to that.
And you stayed up on a sleepless night, and what did you find out?
Like one of the Mythbusters there. We had to resolve this, and what I discovered is someone who's rented a home for the past 5 years.
Get your notepads out, by the way.
And they're, you know, based upon rental rates over the last 5 years for a 2 or 3 bedroom home or townhouse, in all likelihood, in the Barrie area, you have paid out in rent anywhere from $100,000 to $180,000. That's money that's
bring that down to a monthly, Mike.
To your landlord. Well, don't ask me to do that quick.
Okay, you're paying on
anywhere
average
from $2,000, say $1,500 to $2,500 in that range. Again, going over the last, today you'd be paying $2,000 to $3,000 for either of those properties. But 5 years ago, more likely around $1,500 to $2,500.
Now, you asked somebody from 5 years ago what they were paying for a 1 bedroom. They were probably paying more than $1,500. So if you're looking in the 2 to 3 bedroom home
to rent,
I know what.
Oh, these are probably conservative numbers.
Yeah.
So when I say 100 to 180. I think you could probably even make the case in many cases, people were paying probably over that period of time $150,000 to $250,000 in rent. Now, at the same time, if you purchased an average price 3 bedroom home 5 years ago, you would have had an equity gain on that home of, how much would you guess, between 5 years ago and today? Average price home.
The graphic on the form.
The graphic pointed it out. So you would have gone from a home of $375,000. That was the average price for a 3 bedroom detached home in Barrie 5 years ago. Your equity gain, I'm reading this wrong off the screen, your equity gain over that period would have been $375,000 to as much as $400,000 in your pocket for that. And that, you know, you would have paid property taxes and maintenance costs for all of that, and a good portion of that would have gone to mortgage payments, though some of that would have paid down principal. So you would have had principal gain, you would have had equity gain, and as many people are doing, more and more are doing, you may have had a tenant living in a basement apartment who was bringing you in $10,000 to $15,000 a year there. And the nice thing about that revenue that you generated in equity from your home that's different from any other way you're going to legally earn money in Canada is that you do not pay taxes on home equity on a principal residence.
On a principal residence.
That's a gift
Absolutely.
right there. So
it is, and I think it's important that people put some things into perspective here as well, Mike. I mean, listen, there has been a bit of a war on home ownership by the current woke government at the federal level where they want to tax that.
Well, there's room for all.
And I don't have room for it.
Well, some people, if that's your choice to rent, I'm not, dissing on renters, but I just want to make people aware that, hey, there's another alternative here that if you work,
I went a different direction.
Work hard on.
I wasn't picking on the homeowners. I'm saying, listen, there are some people who have had the wonderful benefit of benefits and pensions in their lives, and certain people who
parents
have
who
collective bargaining
gift you that down payment. Not everyone has that opportunity.
But for those who are looking at, listen, I have no other alternative than to look towards how am I going to pay for my retirement, or how am I going to pay for my nursing home or my long-term care facility, or how am I going to give anything to my kids whatsoever because they haven't had other co-pays or matched contributions from employers or anything like that. This has been, and I trust forever will be, a very sacred element inside of our tax code to be able to protect that. So who's paying the bill in the rental scenario? I think it's also important to say, listen, for the investor or the landlord, that is an investment opportunity there, but the tenant has to. The
tenant's paying a mortgage, but they're paying someone else's mortgage.
Absolutely. So the one thing that the tenant hasn't had to do is come up with a down payment. That's typically the differentiator right there.
At any given time, you could probably, ask a renter, and I even no position to buy a home today, but here's a different way to look at things. You got to think long term. And if for the past 5 years you've paid that $150 to $250 in rent, look at the next 5 years and tell yourself, I'm still going to have to pay $150 to $250, maybe more if rents go up over the next 5 years. But tell yourself, this is going to be the last 5 year period in which I do that. I'm going to also, while I'm paying that rent, I'm going to do everything I can to save either for a down payment that I can pay totally on my own, or maybe I'm going to spend the time to find someone who I can co-purchase with and get in on that bottom rung of the ladder, buy the house that's not going to be your be-all dream home, but it's going to be that little place. A young fella, they just sold. 2 young guys, they just got out of college, sold them a house in 2017, interestingly enough. They just sold, and each of them have moved out on their own and bought their own really nice homes with the equity they scored.
Mike, there are some scenarios where renting absolutely makes the most sense, and it wouldn't make sense to do it any other way.
Well, if you move around a lot.
If you move around a lot, for sure. And then maybe if it's a business expense as well, or maybe your employer is picking up the tab or something like that, or contributing towards it. Maybe you've got a change in your life where it's a transition, as you said, maybe going from student into the workforce, and you want to figure out, am I going to land here or on the other coast of the country, or am I going to be in an entire different country altogether?
You're paying child support or alimony.
Maybe you're before marriage, or maybe you're after marriage. Maybe you're a widow or a widower. Maybe something has changed, and it makes absolute sense to do it. And there are people who say, I'm at a place in my life I'm beyond my working years, I'm beyond my conventional employment years, and it makes sense that I'm going to rent.
Returning to the rental market later in life does make sense for a lot. You free up some of that equity to use on your own and rent, and that's being done more and more.
Absolutely. For someone who says, I've got no dependents, I'm not going to be leaving anything behind to anybody.
We're going to spend our time on the casino and on the cruise ships, and and the kids are going to get, they'll get our Royal Dalton collection. But just to summarize it all, so that renter is out as much as $180,000 to maybe as much as over $200,000 over 5 years, with nothing to show. But the Barrie home buyer who bought 5 years ago is ahead as much as $375,000 to $400,000, maybe more with rental income. So compared to every other legal means of earning income, it's one of the top, and it remains the top. And again, as we said in the last before the break, was that it's hard to get your mind around the fact that prices could ever go up beyond what they are now. But that mindset has always been there.
Mike, I want to say something else. I want to say something else based on the numbers that you just presented. For anybody who thinks that saving up for a down payment is inconvenient, just one more time, press rewind or replay on this show and listen to the numbers that you just shared.
Yes.
Because to take
when we started the show 5 years ago,
$150,000 and have zero equity in return. Put it this way, zero return on your investment. Now, in fairness, right, not 100% of what you pay into a mortgage is your equity. We know that, just like not 100%
you're paying
of your
interest
rent.
on that. Yeah.
But you did show the number. You showed the difference of what is left over, what you had to show for that same spend, either on rent or a mortgage, what you were left with after that same 5-year period. And I think that that's critical. So if saving up for a down payment is tough, well, so is spending $150,000 and having nothing to show for it. The difference is it's a death by 1,000 cuts. It's like saying on the window sticker on the car, instead of what the price of the car was, what the cash flow amount was, weekly payments of, right? You still had nothing to show for it at the end of the day. So it is important for people to put things into perspective. Yes, it might be inconvenient, but what you're talking about, and again, we're not talking about people who, no matter what we do, are not going to be in a position to purchase a home without some form of subsidy or assistance, right? Yeah. So for those who could qualify and are wondering which way to go, I think you've laid the numbers out very clearly.
And if that, we're hoping to create a little bit of optimism and maybe a little persuasion at the same time.
Absolutely.
But I want to speak as well to those who are already in the game, those who own homes, those who have earned a lot of that equity because they've owned their home for 5 years, and that equity is parked within that home. And what I would say to them is, I can't know with absolute certainty, and I can't, sign off with a guarantee, but I would bet dollars to donuts that over the next 10 to 15 years, average home prices in Barrie will double yet again. So if you were to take some of that equity on the home that you own, buy that second property, put a tenant in there who's going to pay you $150,000, $180,000 to $250,000 over the next 5 years and help pay that down. You held on to that for, and maybe less than 10 years, but at least 10 years, maybe 15 years to be really conservative on it. you're probably going to double your money when I say double your money, it's always more than double your money with real estate, because you're not buying a $500,000 home with $500,000 cash. You're buying it with maybe $50,000. So if that home doubles, you've taken your $50,000 and turned it into $500,000.
Yeah. The other thing I would say, Mike, for those who are saying, and listen, I'm having a number of these conversations because my children, a couple of them are of that age where they could be looking at, you know, the likelihood or the potential to consider home ownership. Yeah. And there are a lot of parents saying, I don't know how my kids are ever going to do it. Well, again, looking at the numbers that you just presented, right? Even if you were to sit down with a trustee or a lawyer or figure something out with your accountant and decide, yes, I might have to take a line of credit, or yes, I might have to somehow access some of the equity in my home, or I might have to go on as a co-applicant. If you as a parent, big if, are in a position to be able to manage your expenses so that you can qualify to be a co-applicant. And have a scenario where maybe you're not in a position to gift this kind of a down payment or money to your kids. Maybe that's not realistic today.
But you can give them the education and the knowledge.
One, to give them the education and knowledge, and two, have a contract with them that puts them into some form of a rent-to-own scenario with you. Not with some third-party company that has no vested interest in their future, but with you as the parent, if you have the ability, because there are a number of students who are looking at the rental market in and around the university towns going, it's insane, it's actually smarter for me if I can, with my parents or a friend or a family member, get in and buy a home and then rent out some of those rooms to college students and university
and we're
students.
seeing that more and more. And at the risk of stereotyping, where we do tend to see it is with newer Canadians, and I think that's partially because they just have a more readily apparent appreciation of the opportunity that we have here, while the rest of us kind of take it for granted.
Or the lack of opportunity for where they were coming from, right?
And there's that. So they don't want to miss out on that. So they're doing that, and they're looking at any and every opportunity and method of getting into the game. But what I can say, an observation as a realtor, is we're seeing far fewer first-time buyers under 30 now.
So when we come back from the break, where are you going to bring us?
Well, I think when we come back, I think we can talk about just home ownership and how it's becoming more and more of an exclusive club and why that is. And let's have a look at just
nothing like touching the third rail to go to break, Mike.
Let's do it.
But yeah, stay with us. We'll explore that conversation on whether or not home ownership is really an exclusive membership opportunity. Stay with us on the other side of this break.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. We're having a great conversation here. We're talking about the market, just looking at where we're at, how we got here, some of the changes that we've seen over the past few years, but still that opportunity that does exist for home purchasing and home investment. Something I touched on just before the break, and I just want to elaborate on a little bit, is I love working with first-time home buyers. It's always great getting a young family coming into. When I started in this business 22 years ago or so, you saw far more people in their 20s, right out of college, buying that first home. What I am seeing with home prices as high as they are is that average age for a first-time home buyer is creeping up. And so it's like over 30, I think, would be most of those first-time home buyers that we're still seeing them. It's just taken them a little longer to get organized, to get qualified, and get into the game. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be, at a very young age, starting to think in that direction of getting into that first home, because once you've made that commitment, your financial position is so much more solid. And again, appreciation, as we talked about. But like you were saying, like why should someone under 30 assume they can get into home ownership? Now, let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, Thanks for putting me on the spot there. I appreciate it.
Well, and just remember, I
think it's a fair conversation. I think it's a really fair conversation, and I think, a couple things that I like to consider. You just talked about it just a second ago. It's about being prepared for it. Yeah. And I think that if you are younger in your years and you are fortunate enough to have a conversation around the dinner table that's saying, hey, listen, love the sports, love the arts. By the way, what are your plans for home ownership? Let's talk about the realities of living expenses, right? Cell phones plans are anywhere between $50 and $100 a month. Internet's maybe around $50 to $100 a month. All these things. What are you putting away for? What's your plan?
Yeah. What can I sacrifice and put towards that plan?
Well, and that's just it. Like, put it this way. Do you have to sacrifice to put towards it, or are you prepared to work differently, extra, somehow to come up with some additional income? 2 jobs. I do meet with people who are full-time students and have a job or 2 or sometimes 3, and they don't have parental support. Man, if you want to talk about someone who's going to get home ownership, tell somebody that it's never going to happen and take away all their supports and watch them fight for survival. I mean, they will do whatever it takes.
Oh yeah.
Many.
Yeah.
Not all.
Yeah.
So the question, though, that I did ask is, and I absolutely have, I stand by this question, why should somebody under 30 assume that they can get into home ownership today? Because the prices that they are today didn't just happen.
You're looking at least $40,000 to $50,000 to get in the door for you know, a decent condo or even a townhouse.
Absolutely. But we've had this conversation. We just showed the numbers on the graph. Prices were out of range for many 5 years ago. They're out of range for many today. However, somehow the averages and the numbers and the percentages, yes, they are slowly eroding and slowly slipping away, but it is still possible, and we talk about other things like immigration, et cetera. So for somebody who is under 30 to assume anything, for somebody who's over 30 to assume anything, I think is nonsense. I think it's crazy to do that. However, for somebody who is sharp, well, where are you in your life? You're out of high school. Okay, great. Did you go to post-secondary, college, or university or something like that? Fantastic, good for you if you did. Did you go straight into the workforce? Fantastic if you did. Did you go into an apprenticeship, like a trade union or something like that, where you're going towards journeyman status or whatever that is? Fantastic. Doesn't matter, whichever it is.
Whatever route you take.
Whatever route you took, where are you in your life? And what are you doing? Because age alone is not enough to say I'm entitled to home ownership. It has never been about that. It has always been about qualification. And so that's the thing that I'm interested in speaking with people about is, listen, whatever your life path and choice is, fantastic. Let's talk about what it looks like in reality. So just because you really, 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 really want a house means nothing.
No.
You've got to be qualified for it. And qualification does include having a minimum credit score, or you pay the consequences of higher access to money.
Being responsible around your credit, and it's tough today because there are more and more expenses, but it's easier today to know where you're at any given time. You just pull up your phone and you can check your credit and
go onto your bank app. It tells you where your credit is, and look at your balance.
Make some responsible decisions over the course of a month, and then go back and visit that and see how it's impacted on your score.
We've shared with our audience over the years something, and this doesn't always appease everybody, and that's fine. But whatever your parents did, don't do it. And I don't mean that out of disrespect to the parents. I mean, it's likely not going to work. That same strategy
give some examples.
is likely not going to. Well, I mean, put it this way, Mike. Putting those things into perspective, right? When somebody of a previous generation was earning $1.25 an hour, but a car was $3,000 and a house might have been $30,000 or $65,000, and interest rates were anywhere between 17 and 21%. Like those scenarios don't exist today.
Yeah.
And we do know that the house prices have increased at a rate that is different from employment. Typical cost of living increases in employment.
Right.
So what are the scenarios? Well, a couple of things that are worth taking into consideration is when I bought what I bought, I bought it with cash. Doesn't exist today. It's not likely, and it's actually not good advice to not use credit. It's good advice to use credit.
So long as you're paying it off.
It's good advice to use credit properly, but nobody's lending somebody half of. You just gave a scenario where when you buy let's go back to the average home. Well, no, listen, an average home price is $775. You don't need to buy the average home.
No, you can buy into a condo
for $450
a condo townhouse even for under $500.
Exactly. So let's say you're buying in for $500,000. You're going to put anywhere between 25 to 50 to $100,000 down, depending on what you're able to come up with.
But as little as 25 if you can squeak in and your credit's good.
As little as 25 and you can squeak in. Let's be blunt. No one is going to lend you $475,000 without you having good credit, without you showing that you were able to be responsible with your cell phone bill for $100 a month and your car payment for $300 a month, or whatever. You know, if you got that college credit card that they hand everybody on their first day of university, which I think is crazy, just the way that they do it. But if you show that you were able to manage credit responsibly, these are all good things. But walking in from somebody who says, I paid cash for everything, bad advice. Not that I don't wish you could do that,
the other caveat,
but it's not intelligent use of what's available, the tools that are available out there.
The other caveat in there, I would say, is you want that credit, but what you may also want as well as a willing parent who is going to co-sign on that purchase to get you in the door, and maybe you buy them off of that mortgage a couple years in when you get it straightened out. But that's something you see more and more, is the co-signer of the co-signer.
Absolutely. I will give a little caution, and I don't want to speak out of both sides of our mouth on this show, but I will tell you that you got to know what you're getting into in each scenario. The moment you give a bank something, they don't want to give it back to you. So the moment you go on title with a co-signer, they're not going to make it easier than they need to get rid of that co-signer, because that's risk mitigation for them, right?
So what about if you're at that 4-year mark and it's time for renewal? Would that be the time ideally to do that?
So renewal versus refinance. Again, renewal means you're keeping things
the same mortgage
as they are and looking to get rid of someone. Well, you're going to have to prove that you can qualify without, and the bank's still going to have to say yes, and doesn't matter what you think you showed us, we're willing to give up that extra
it's one
risk,
scenario, it's one strategy, but it's one you should go into eyes wide open.
Absolutely, eyes wide open. But in terms of, again, for someone under 30, and I don't know why we picked on under 30, I think it was just the numbers that you were saying in terms of first-time home buyers. Again, where are you in your life? What decision are you about to make? Are you doing this single, solo? Do you have a special person in your life that you're doing this as a potential spouse? Again, careful, right? Because as soon as you join those forces, it's now a legal contract, and there's implications there when you're coming on with another person on title. Okay.
We'll do a show about that sometime.
We absolutely will. We'll bring a lawyer in for that one. But where are you in your career? Are you just starting out, and are you planning on being here for 5 and 10 years, or might you jump at the opportunity to move somewhere else? We talked about that earlier in the show. You might be in Ontario today, but your career opportunity might be in British Columbia. So again, do you need to be buying the dream home, or sort of your, not necessarily even your forever home, but anything other than your foot in the door starter home? Right now? Because again, why not get into a scenario where you say, well, listen, I've got 10% down, which is great. I'm still going to need the mortgage default insurance, but I could live in the basement. I was already living in my mom's basement anyway. I could live in the basement a little longer, but at least this time it's in my basement and rent out the upstairs, or vice versa. If you want to live on the main floor and rent out the basement, but you're at least supplementing your income.
You're supplementing, and for some, and this is not in everybody's wheelhouse that they'd want to do this, but we talk about the second suite. Anybody else think of that basement or that upper level, or maybe it's a separate unit on the property. Another scenario that works with some is to bring in a boarder. Maybe it's a student. If you live in northeast end of Barrie, a lot of people are doing that. They just have 1 or 2 students who come in, they're there for part of the year, and they're paying them $700, $800 a month to rent a room in the house. Anything and everything that's going to bring you a supplementary income and help you to carry that mortgage is something worth considering.
So we got to go to break, but on the other side, when we come back, let's also talk about some of the changes that are coming in. Again, we're a little bit touching on first-time home buyers more than I wanted to, and I think more than you wanted to today, but there are going to be some potential changes in legislation. So we'll talk about what is the difference between what previous generations did and what people today might do.
And summarize as well just some of those values and benefits of ownership over renting.
Absolutely. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV. And Mike, we've presented a lot of numbers and a lot of good perspective here. We've taken people through a bit of a journey on how we got to where we are in terms of the numbers, right? In terms of values, in terms of home ownership continuing to present itself as a very solid investment vehicle and a great asset class to be.
It will continue to be.
And it will continue to be. But
so long as people need a place to live and our population continues to grow, real estate's going to be a safe bet.
Absolutely. Now, we sort of did a little bit of front half, second half of the show on those who are already in the market versus, or not versus, as well as including those who are looking at considering getting into the market.
Yeah.
But for this little segment here, what I really want to do is talk about sort of, we touched on, you don't necessarily need to be buying into that forever home or the luxurious estate.
Yeah, it's not the dream home right out there. I always refer to it as get on that first rung of the ladder.
Yep.
And more so than at any time in the past. I mean, it's always been a good formula, but it's almost a requirement now, and that is to get in. And that first home may not be the place you actually want, or that ideal home, but it's a foot in the door.
This is the thing I really want to talk about here, Mike, because I think that there is a segment of the community that is talking about it's out of reach, it'll never happen to me. And the question that I will often challenge back with is, are you sure you're never going to get in, or are you sure you're just not getting in the way you wanted to, the way you dreamed it would turn out like, right? And I think it's important to say, you showed the numbers. We spent, a good half an hour, if not more, in this segment talking about the fact that the numbers don't lie. Here are the actual numbers. If you were renting versus if you were owning, even if it wasn't the dream home, you showed numbers based on the average home.
Yeah.
Okay. But the return on investment was still, and of course the return on investment was probably even more significant on average to slightly below average price homes than it was on the high end, on the top end.
You may well have been, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the numbers will support that. But I think what's important to say is the return on that investment. So even if you get your foot in the door in home ownership, maybe you're coming out of home ownership into another home, or maybe you're moving out of home ownership into another home on your own, etc. There's still an incredible return on investment and opportunity that if your foot is in the door, you catapult yourself up that rung in the ladder.
That is one of, I made a list here of just some of the advantages of home ownership, and one of them was that flexibility, that mobility. You basically, once you're into a home and you've been in for a while, you have the freedom to go wherever you want, whenever you want, more or less. More so than someone who's a renter. And you can land inside. Like you can, decide, okay, I want to live in Edmonton. I want to live in Victoria. I want to live in, Halifax. Okay, I have a home when I sell. I've got a chunk of cash. When I land there, I can set myself up right away, pretty much pick up where I left off in terms of, a home and everything else. That freedom is only afforded you after you've been in the market and been an owner for a while, and it's certainly worth striving towards.
Well, and I think, listen, I think what I would say is if you're going to struggle anyway, you might as well struggle with a plan, right? And struggling with a plan is important. But when you're going to make that move, we talked about it earlier, if you're selling in one market and buying in the same market, you might be making a lateral move. If you're selling in one market and buying in another market, hopefully it's towards your benefit. Hopefully you're timing that move. So getting the data and studying it and speaking about it with someone.
It's the freedom to do that too that affords you to move, because a lateral move, it's not necessarily because I want to put some money in my pocket. It may be I want to be in a different neighborhood. I want to be in a home with the pool in the backyard, or with the the finished basement versus where I am now.
Closer to
any
my kids,
number
whatever.
of reasons. It's just time. Sometimes it is just time. Someone says we just need a change of scenery. So and we have the option to do that because we are homeowners.
Absolutely, but you put together obviously some classes of designation of home, building classes. There are condos, there are detached, there are semis, there are whatever. What are you seeing as moving right now? We talked about this a little bit in a recent show, but give us a bit of a refresher. Okay, so we are off the highs a little bit. You're suggesting we've bottomed out. We're starting to see some increased demand and pressure back in. Where we are right now, right, that same person who was buying, it's not suddenly a new person buying, it may be the same person buying, but at a slightly different price point, putting different pressures on different housing availability. What do you see as opportunity right now, given where...
Opportunity or activity?
Okay.
Or, yes. As far as activity, and it's a little bit different than what I had presumed was happening, or in addition to what I expected was going to happen. I thought we would see increased activity in the lower end, below to average price homes, just because the high cost of entry, the high carrying costs of a home with higher mortgage rates, that would squeeze more people down towards those lower price homes. And that's true, we did see that. But I thought that would be to the detriment of those higher price homes. But what I'm coming to realize is the activity in the higher price homes, they're still selling, you know, within reasonable amounts of time, and they're getting list price or close to list price. And the thing is, because beyond a certain price point, those who are shopping for $1 million plus home they've been less impacted by both COVID as well as the recession or close to recession that we've been in for the last little while. So they're still good. They're not like all the doom and gloom stories on the news. They're looking at it. I'm not seeing it. I'm just still doing everything I'm doing, and the money's still going into the bank and everything else. So I thought, of course, high-end homes, nobody's going to be buying them because we're coming into a scary economy, but it just hasn't been happening.
I'm going to throw this out there.
So the short answer is, activity's happening across the board. What has really changed, though, is there's far less inventory. Yeah. We're kind of in a similar scenario to where we were at the start of the run-up at the beginning of the pandemic.
Well, and when there's less inventory, that's going to put pressure on that inventory.
And inventory's going down. So there's a point there where they cross where we're going to start seeing multiple offers, I believe.
We're going to call it. We're going back into a seller's market. Yep. And that's really what's going to happen, because as there's less inventory, there's going to be more pressure on that inventory.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, I'm going to suggest, to bolster your observation around why we didn't see sort of a real steep decline in activity in the higher price points, let's call it above average price point homes, is again, we still have what is above average in this market is still average in a market that's only an hour away, and that's in the GTA. So I think that again helped to keep that level of pressure and interest up in that market.
They're still coming here from south because our price points are still far lower. We still have a beautiful town here. It's getting better all the time. There's so many new projects that are slated or in the process of being built. This city really is evolving, and I'm excited about a lot of the changes we're going to see. And just, I want to touch on this before we close out, just some of those advantages of home ownership too that I scribbled some notes. Equity from a home affords you the opportunity to invest further. Owning a home gives you added financial security for retirement. It provides for something substantial to leave your children and grandchildren one day. And it's not too late to make that transition or begin planning, because if you spent that $180,000 on rent in the last 5 years, perhaps looking at the next 5 years where we suggested you may want to find ways to say, maybe you bring in somebody to co-own.
Well, let me jump on that for a second.
And put half of that into savings.
Because if you're wondering if now is the right time to sell, and you are also looking at having a shift in your own life, again, it could be because your family is growing, it could be because your family is downsizing, it could be because you need a change of floor plan or something like that. Again, if you're in a position where you have some equity, you may not want to sell at this moment. Now, again, if it's a seller's market, yeah, you may want to sell at this moment, okay? But if it wasn't that scenario where you needed to make a shift, but again, you don't lose money if you don't sell, and you don't also make money if you don't sell. Your value is if you time it right.
Well, timing right.
But you could take the equity to buy that next property if your opportunity allows it to do so. Because if there is a vacuum or a pressure in the rental market, you could rent out that existing primary home to help keep those payments while you go and transfer yourself into the new home. There's lots of opportunity there. So it's, yes, you could take on a boarder and stay living there, or yes, you could rent out your home and you could purchase your new home.
Yeah, good point. I just want to take you back to your earlier point, something I wanted to add in there with regards to, is it a good time, whatever. We're in neither a buyer or a seller's market right now. As a seller, you're in a good position because your house over the last 5-year period, you're still up. You know, value we saw that little peak that most people missed over that 4 months, but we just came back down to, we're still at a very high point for selling. As a buyer, what I'm really seeing now is people are able to take the time to go in, see a few more houses. They don't have to jump and put an offer on the first home that comes up in their price range like they did a couple of years ago. They're looking at more homes. They're taking more time.
Though, Mike.
It's a little more. That won't remain.
Yeah, you're suggesting we're starting to see a little bit more of that momentum.
If we're shifting at all, we're shifting more towards that seller's market.
That's all I was calling. That was a prediction.
Yeah, there'll be a little more pressure on the purchasers.
It's not a prediction if we're telling what is.
Well, now it's a fact if we've told it. Yeah.
Well, clearly. No. But as we wrap out, again, I do want to also advise people. Please take the time, get the facts. Be paying attention. Speak to somebody who's a licensed individual. Why?
A licensed mortgage broker, such as yourself, Arif,
fair enough.
Got a desk waiting.
But even if it's not me, Mike,
realtor.
Even if it's not me, this is important. Okay. Because this is a little bit of inside information for those who aren't reading sort of page 3 of the newspaper. And that is that the regulators are still looking at where are we right now with inflation, and where are we looking at housing affordability, and where are we looking at calming the market, and what are we looking at with recession. And they are currently in the middle of sort of information gathering with stakeholders around what are some recommended next steps. My gut, I could be wrong, but the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions probably isn't thrilled necessarily entirely, they may or may not come out and admit this, with the moves that the Bank of Canada governor has made towards raising interest rates, etc. Yeah. I'm not saying he's against raising interest rates. I'm saying,
do you think we've peaked?
That those two different departments might be saying, oh, this corrective move that you did there now has put pressure on us here. And what do we need to do about it? We got to wrap out, and I think there's another show in it, Mike, but what I am suggesting to you is that while people are adjusting and reacting to the moves that the bank and the Bank of Canada has made, and also around qualification and around how difficult it is to access some money right now, people are looking at, well, then I'm going to go to an alternative lender, or I'll extend my amortization. And that's on the radar right now of OSFI, which is the Office of Superintendent of Financial Institutions. Sure. And they're basically saying, careful, because that has implications as well. You extend your amortization, it means you're going to pay interest for a longer period of time.
Yeah,
closing thoughts, we got to go.
Closing thoughts, and for those of you who are homeowners, if you're in there, everybody's mortgage with those cheap rates that you locked in 3, 4, 2 years ago, it's going to come due, and that's the time to get out and start looking again, because that next home or that new term of your mortgage is going to put you up to today's rates.
Get the information, folks. We'll see you again next time on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. Thanks for joining.